With the filing of certificates of candidacy underway, the election season is truly upon us. We know who most of the main candidates for national office will be. We might know who's running for local office where we live. But do we know what the voters want? And how can we tell? Hi, I'm John Nery, and you are in the public square. A relatively new survey company proposes psychographic segmentation, which has been in use in marketing research in the last few decades, as a better framework than demographic analysis to understand the Filipino voter. Would it make for better candidates? Joining us today are Roland Ramirez, Managing Director of the newcomer Insightspedia, and Jay Bautista, Managing Director of that old standby, Kantar Media. Welcome, Roland, and welcome back, Jay. Thank you for joining us in the public square.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, happy to be back.
Let me start with a question for you, Roland. Instead of demographics, you use psychographics as a framework to better understand the Filipino voter. How did you put the framework together?
Well, I think the rationale behind psychographics is what we wanted to actually delve deeper into motivations, beliefs, belief system, value systems, and all that, because we think that yung emotional connection is going to be a far reliable determinant of who they will vote for. And emotional connection is going to be a better way to predict who they will vote for. So that's how we kind of where it all started. We just wanted to actually go out of yung usual box of like demographic, because everyone is actually doing that. We think it's okay, but we think we could actually better that by doing a different type of like predictive modeling, if you like.
Jay, big and small companies use psychographic segmentation to better understand their markets, right? How come this is not the standard when it comes to political surveys? I mean, I think one or two does something like this, but why only now?
Well, yeah, if we look at the story behind this, it's actually a 2-3 year in the making. We started the conversation right after the 2022 elections because of what happened during that time. A lot of people were surprised with how the candidates were chosen in terms of the election. But when we did actually do a study of all the standards of polling around the world, and what we found out was that segmentation was becoming a major part of the way opinion polling was being done in major markets. Ranking and horse races were no longer the standard because of the results of the 2016 elections in the US and also other countries historically. So people were looking for more accurate ways of understanding the voters. It's not just because of age, gender, or income class anymore. It's really about, as Roland mentioned, looking at the values, what's important to them, their aspirations, and how they feel the candidates can address these needs. That's where the inspiration of introducing this segmentation.
You identified 5 psychographic segments. Before I ask about them specifically, were there really just 5, or did you combine some? I mean, would you have gone with like 4? This is something that the audience told you.
Well, the smallest segment po is actually only 12% anyway. So if you go any lower than that, it might not be as robust or readable anymore.
Okay.
So we tried to actually end it there.
Okay.
Meaning, it still is meaningful at that level. Below that, it might not be anymore as robust or equally important as actionable, diba? So we wanted to actually make it readable at all voter segments.
Okay. Let's go through each of the 5. So the first one, the biggest one, is the misunderstood mainstream, which has, what, 33%?
33%, yeah.
Can you talk about that?
So, yung misunderstood mainstream is actually, they make up the largest voter segment in the Philippines. It's misunderstood. It's labeled misunderstood because they were, popularly referred to in the last elections as bobotante, meaning, they were not thinking about who they wanted to vote for, or there wasn't much thought behind, their vote or their candidate choice. So yeah, that was the biggest, and to our surprise, the biggest surprise or shock behind that is that these people actually are after competence. So they are the heaviest in terms of looking for competence in their candidate or leader. So, that's why it's misunderstood.
Jay, we had spoken of this earlier about the old approach to looking at the electorate as consisting of bobotantes, no? How is their approach, miles ahead of that old way of understanding the electorate?
Well, if you look at the landscape today of all the opinion polling providers, the focus is still very much on the old standards, which is geographic analysis, demographics, and then ranking. So at the end of the day, it's almost like a popularity contest more than anything. And that's what they publish, and that's what's publicly available. So the depth of really understanding the whys and the motivations of voters stops there. But with the PINAS survey, we see that it goes a lot deeper. And as Roland mentioned, for example, the misunderstood segment, people would dismiss them as they're just looking after someone who's pretty or someone who dances well. But actually, they have reasons, and they're very specific attributes they look for the candidates to vote for. So if I were a candidate and I want to target them, now I know how to strategize and how to communicate my messaging, because I now have a better understanding of what they need.
I hope to get back later to that point about whether it is still, a popularity contest. I want to go back to the first segment, misunderstood mainstream. But it's only 33%. So it's a plurality, yes. But is it the mainstream? Why do you call it the mainstream?
Well, we call it mainstream because they make up the largest segment of the voter population. We thought that the over indexes with yung behaviors and how they vote, motivation, value system, if you like, what ranks as very important to the least important attribute, if you like, from leaders. They basically have the same over indexes in this group. So that's kind of how we look.
So mainstream doesn't necessarily mean majority. It just means the...
Well, these are over indexes. So how it works is basically it doesn't, it's not mutually exclusive from each other. Okay. So it's just, so it's there because we think, it's targetable. Primarily, that's the reason why we put, groupings or voter segments, is because we think you can, target these voter types specifically, right? There is a way to actually, say your messaging, appeal to them, where you can actually reach them, how to say your messaging, and so forth.
Let's go to the second segment, passive onlookers, right? It's 23%,
yeah.
Right? What is that about?
So passive onlookers is an interesting segment because these people are actually, these voters tend to take a backseat, approach to, elections in general, meaning these people are like, for lack of a better term, resigned that, their votes may not,
make
a difference in any elections. So they kind of indifferent, right? So nothing I do, whoever I vote, is not going to change, how politics is actually run in the Philippines. So kind of, so they're the largest segment of voters, registered voters, who did not vote in the last elections. So kind of important because, it is big enough. It's the second biggest segment. So if you can actually convince this voter group to vote for, a specific candidate, it's quite substantial.
The 23%, no? This is still, as you said, a considerable plurality. How do you distinguish them from the misunderstood mainstream? Wouldn't passive onlooking be misunderstood as a form of, bobotante behavior?
Not precisely, not really, because I suppose mainstream, to a large extent, are more active in elections. They're more active in the election process, the selection process, because as we said, these people are actually looking for competence. So you can imagine these people are probably doing the research contrary to common belief, right? Doing research in terms of who is actually the right candidate to lead us forward, something like that. Whereas yung passive onlookers kind of take a different approach, meaning, they are aware what's going on, maybe not as aware as mainstream, but I think the big difference is that they take a more passive kind of, I'll see how it unfolds as opposed to, I'll take a more active role. These people are, as the name suggests, more passive, diba? So they wait until things actually kind of develop. They probably are, the last ones to decide who to vote for. They kind of wait until, things kind of matured already in the campaign, as opposed to mainstream. Maybe they are, relatively speaking, decide who they want to vote for earlier in the stage.
Jay, you folks in Kantar Media, you're the experts in media consumption. Already at this point, so we're looking at half of the electorate, no? The 33 plus the 23%. Can you speak of their media habits?
Yeah, actually, the misunderstood mainstream are the ones you would categorize as very aggressive online. So they're the ones who really fight for their candidates once they've identified with a particular candidate based on the values and attributes. So sila yung mga talagang diehard in terms of they're gonna protect, they're gonna speak out, they're gonna bash, etc. In contrast, the passive segment, you won't see them, commenting or even posting about candidates. You don't see them as active.
Are they lurkers, or they're not even online?
They're online, but they're lurkers. That's a correct term. So as Roland mentioned, you will probably see them once things are more clearer and may winnable segment na, then they might decide, or they might totally just not vote at all, because again, as the studies show, they're resigned to the fact that they cannot influence the future of the politics. But so media habits wise, one is very active, particularly on social media. The others are in the shadows lurking.
One more question about the misunderstood mainstream. There seems to be a demographic trace in the analysis, because and this is very interesting to me, you say that it consists of the very young and the old. Right? Can you talk more about that?
Well, it's an interesting one because, it's not, I think how I can best explain that is that, it's the young ones, the millennials, are actually more exposed to, social media. They're a bit more activist because, the level of information available to them at their fingertips is just there, right? The older ones, actually, the boomers, if you like, are actually in that mix, because these people have kind of desensitized a bit of politics and so on. So they look for competence more than any other
that's what binds the two.
Yes, exactly.
Search for competence.
Search for competence. So
but how you define competence? I mean, That can vary, right? I mean, their definition of the right candidate can be very different.
Oh, yeah, that's correct. So that can vary depending on, like, for example, the perception of knowledge or definition of knowledge is actually different to different people. You don't have to. It doesn't mean like the highest education. It doesn't mean actually spending the most time doing that job necessarily. It's just like, a matter of perception. If they think you're actually an expert on that subject matter, then you can be perceived as somebody knowledgeable about that as well.
All right. Let's go to the third psychographic segment, solution seekers. It's 17%. Can you talk about that?
So, solution seekers are quite interesting because these people are really, really engaged in elections, right? These tend to be the noisiest online. These people tend to be the angriest on social media. They tend to actually fight for their candidates the loudest, the strongest. If you like, they're looking for a silver bullet, right? They're looking for somebody who can save us right now, right? So, and so they tend to look for a leader who is very strong, perception of like strength, and somebody who can actually is bigger than the system, if you like, something like that.
Jay, would this be roughly equivalent to the constituency of Rodrigo Duterte, for instance?
Yeah, I was about
Like
to
a
say.
man in shining armor, knight in shining armor, man on horseback.
So our discussion earlier about in the populist movement actually reflects very well on this segment. They're looking for those who have their knight in shining armor, so to speak, which is why certain candidates come up in the recent survey because of that perception or image that at the end of the day, if nothing else works, I can rely on this people or this candidate to help me when all else fails. Government, social services, private sector fails. These candidates will help me at my darkest time.
And the contrast with the misunderstood mainstream is that the misunderstood mainstream looks for competence.
Whereas this one looks for character.
Yeah.
What does that mean? Like,
character could be strength of character. Somebody who's actually going to
a strong personality.
A strong personality.
That's it.
Well, again, it could mean different things to different people, but that kind of stands out. If the perception is that these people are actually going to choose somebody who is the strongest amongst a pool of candidates who are treading lightly on certain issues.
Okay.
They're looking for somebody who is going to make a strong stand for them, for the general public, and so on. So he's going to fight for them, if you like. So, that is very strong. I mean, you can also argue that, in terms of emotional connection, this voter segment seems to have the strongest connection to voters, right? So
not the fourth segment, which is connection cravers.
Well, because if you go as far as like fighting for your candidate online, being noisy, being rallying behind your candidate through thin and thinner, you tend to actually think that maybe there is a stronger connection.
So can you say something more about connection cravers?
So connection cravers is
15% of the electorate.
So connection cravers is interesting because these people are looking for some sort of association with their candidates. So connection. So these people tend to value or put a premium on candidates who actually come to their place, shake their hands, even go as far as like sitting on their sofa and then talking to them as a family. So that creates some sort of personal connection, right? So, this voter segment value that. This voter segment also are looking for, tend to be the first or the one segment that is looking for help. They expect help from the candidates they vote for. after this candidate actually wins.
This reminds me of something from U.S. politics. This saying that this candidate is someone you can have a beer with. That's the sort of candidate the connection.
Very relatable. So I think we saw that a few presidential elections ago. When the Arab actually made a huge connection to the masses, and he was thought as everyone's friend, something like that, right? I mean, Duterte was somewhat like that too when he was labeled Digong, and therefore that's father, right? So that actually creates some sort of connection to voters as well.
Yeah. From a media standpoint, in terms of platforms, this segment relates well to what we call in marketing as activation, on the ground events, rallies, motorcades, because they really come face to face with the client, shake their hands, and these are also those who react well in terms of those who are part of ayuda activities or social service, which are on the ground and in their barangay, in their barrio, so to speak. So these are where they really find connection, or at least a relationship with their candidates.
The issue or the ability to connect, this idea of relatability, Jay, has the choice of media changed, or has the changing media landscape changed the way a candidate can be relatable? Like today, do you need to be on social media to be relatable, or will TV ads work?
Well, a good question. So two parts to the change in the landscape. One is the changing demographics. Aside from the segments, we all know that this election will be one where Gen Zs and millennials will be a very dominant force. And we all know that Gen Zs and millennials are more online in terms of their media habits. Back in 2016, 2010 elections, the Gen Xers and the Boomers were still the dominant voter segments. And their dominant media habit or preferred media habits are television, radio, and print. So there's that factor in terms of the changing media consumption. And then there's also the need for voters nowadays to find authenticity in terms of the messaging. So there's a lot of misinformation, disinformation in the past elections. So now they're very careful in terms of vetting, and because of that, social media plays a good part, because trust is I think high when people get shared material from friends. So the virality of messaging right now, I think, also helps. And then the candidates as well can become more authentic in the way they present themselves because of social media. They have Facebook posts, Instagram, TikTok, for example, is going to be big these elections. And I think that's also one way that they become more down to earth and more real to a lot of voters.
Jay, in the last 2 weeks, I've heard a lot of radio ads for Tolentino, Senator Tolentino, the majority leader now, and Camille Villar, who wants to replace her mother in the Senate. Tolentino is doing well in the surveys, in part because I guess he's an incumbent. Villar, although with that name, not doing so well. Is that a question of relatability, or? I'm sorry to put you in the spot.
No,
and it's just a very small piece of data, right? I mean, radio ads.
At this stage, I think it's more of awareness that one, she's running, and that she's related to the Villars. Because, for example, Senator Amy is also running. She started early in terms of her advocacy campaigns. As early as March of this year, she already had billboards and she already had TV ads. So at this point, she's already been 90% of at least the TV population, or more than 50 million, are already aware that she's running. Camille, I think, has started later, the same way as Abby Binay started around August only in terms of their campaign. So not yet relatability, probably awareness is still the challenge at this point.
Roland, let's go to the fifth segment. economy warriors, which has 12%.
12%, yeah.
Yeah. Can you talk about
So yeah, these people actually they worry about jobs, income or wages in the economy at large. They worry about these people are typically more family orientated compared to other segments. So they worry about the future of the country, their family, in fact, as well. So, it's not to say that, these, people are not worried, I mean, from other segments as well, but worried about the economy. It just says that, the highest over-index actually belong to this group. So, that's the interesting thing about this voter segment is that if you appeal to them, you tend to actually have that will tend to have a knock-on effect on other voter segments too, because of course you can trust that other voter segments, there will be those who care about the economy and so on as well, right? So it's kind of, it's small, but you just don't know how many other voter segments you can actually influence by influencing this one particularly.
But in your PNAS survey, which is your ongoing monitoring or opinion survey related to the election, you also compiled a list of top voter concerns. And the top voter concerns many of them are economic in nature, jobs and so on. How would you, and you said that this is shared by all 5 segments. How do you distinguish the economy warriors who are worried about these things and the others who share that worry? How do you separate them?
Well, it's still different issues, I would say, like, connection cravers tend to actually worry mostly about disinformation, fake news. Solution seekers tend to worry about, inflation and so on. So they worry about, I forget now actually what else, but they have different worries too as different segments.
Okay.
So it's just an over-index for economy warriors, worrying mostly about the economy.
So that would be top of mind for them. The others would share the worries, but not necessarily top of mind.
Yes, not necessarily top of mind, yeah.
Yeah. How interesting, connection cravers worry the most about disinformation.
Correct. Yeah, that's kind of ironic, but very interesting actually to see.
Very interesting, right? I mean, this whole notion of connection, of course, but also authenticity. How interesting. Of course, everyone's worried about trust, but this one is...
It's good you mentioned actually about authenticity because in terms of values, connection cravers, put the most weight on authenticity as a value they're looking for, they look for in candidates.
These distinctive characteristics, they just emerged out of your survey. How did you, give them the names? Like... 3 of the, there's an analytical framework involved here.
Of course.
Can you talk about that?
Well, I suppose we wanted to actually see first where the over indexes lie, and from those sets of like common values or common beliefs and so on. That's kind of how we got or put together a name for it, So, it was important for us to see what trends or what segments actually come out first before actually putting a name attached to them. I think we wanted to make sure that it captures, who they are without really knowing what they stand for necessarily, because connection cravers, just by listening or hearing what, the name is, you kind of make that assumption what they probably stand for.
Okay. Jay, in your experience, well, you did say that I think solution seekers reminded you of activation and so on. In your experience, what other previous marketing research categories were you reminded of when you went through these 5 segments?
Clearly, it's good to put candidates in the same view as brand equity. So,
Okay.
and brand equity is really based on consumers, being aware of the product, number two, preferring the product, and number three, purchasing it religiously. So, if you were to look at that as an analogy, the candidates need to show themselves as, the voters need to be aware of them. Voters need to be aware of their attributes and what they can benefit from, and then that they can be trusted to serve them. Hence, the need for them to vote and support them in the election. So that kind of reminds me of the analogy in terms of marketing. That and then also that the risk here is if you're not authentic, the next elections you will really find out the hard way. I mean, so the midterms is usually a good test when there are re-electionists, because have they
Excuse me.
made sure that their brand promise benefited the electorate or not? Because if they get elected again, then they're sure that their positioning and their attributes meet the needs of the voters. If not, then obviously the authenticity was not there in the first place.
Yeah, but this whole effort is marketing, right? It's not sales.
No, it's marketing, correct.
Yeah. What do you tell candidates who say, no, but I want to know how to win? I mean, what you're saying is that these are the voters. This is the best way to understand them. And then they come back to you and say, I just want to know how to win.
No, it does actually. It does exactly that, because for two reasons. We made this voter segments primarily because we think those voter profiling actually makes for better voter targeting. Right, so a better profiling mechanism, if you like, actually creates or enables better voter targeting. So marketing is like, if you want to be perceived, like I think si Doc Willie Ong is a perfect example of that, because he was able to, successfully, sell himself as somebody who, can be trusted in terms of medical advice and so on and so forth. So he stands for maybe PhilHealth, something like that, right? Where he will fix the healthcare system in the Philippines, something like that, right? So he stood for that, and he stuck with that messaging for a long time, and so people now find it easy to, especially now that he's on the news, right? It does really help his, connection or equity to voters, right? So I think it's about, selling yourself in a way that, can connect to specific types of voters. I mean, it's finding out who do you appeal to the most in terms of voter segments, and then bridge those gaps where you kind of rank like that, or you rank very low in certain segments, diba? So it's trying to, personalize, if you like, your messaging, depending on who you're trying to attract.
But if I'm a low or mid-tier candidate, let's say for the Senate, I take your words to heart. I craft a campaign strategy based on that. I still have to reckon with the fact that your top 12 list, you have 13 people who have a fighting chance of landing in the Senate if the elections were held in August. They all have a name recall. Many of them are incumbents, or like in the case of your top-notcher, Tito Soto, together with Frank Drilon, most number of Senate victories. If he wins, he will be the senator with the most number of Senate terms. And then you have Willie Ong, who has a massive social media following. I guess my question is, how do you still bump up against the popularity factor? What do you say to candidates who say, well, it's all nice and good, but I need to be popular first? Maybe Jay first. And
Yeah, go.
So I'll relate it again to media. So let's say you're a new TV program and you want to go against the top rating programs like
Sure.
Batang Quiapo or Pulang Lupa. So the first thing I'll do when I have this type of studies, to look at where the strengths are. My strengths are in terms of those segments, and I'll highlight that. And then where am I weak in terms of those segments, and I'll try to craft my strategy and messaging to address the weakness there. So whether it's awareness or the type of issues that I need to highlight for those segments. And then I also need to compare myself with the big players and see where they're vulnerable, so that I can also craft messaging. So it has to be a program, and so it's not going to be overnight, at least from a media research perspective. But this allows me to have a clear and actionable pathway to success. The challenge is, am I starting too late? If I'm candidate X, if I'm going to look at it at this point, and then I'll probably decide to do it now or 2028. But if I see that I'm outside the top 12, so that means I have a fighting chance. And with these tools, I'll definitely may be able to break that cycle, at least from a media perspective.
I think this election is going to be a very crucial one in terms of what people actually, what candidates stand for, because using the example we talked about earlier about Camille Villar not ranking very high, despite that name recall. If you think about it, in the top 15, everyone who's anyone in terms of political name is there, right? The Estradas, the Binais, the Cayetanos, so if you think about it, they're all popular. You look at the top 20, they're all, I'm sure very high in terms of name recall. So it has to be, and it will be, I argue, more than a popularity contest. If it hasn't started yet, it will start soon. So this is where we think, this tool, kind of zeroes in on things you stand for, and what people actually might vote you for, what your strengths are, what your appeal is, and so on and so forth. Because I think against a pool, a bevy of candidates who are equally, if not more popular, more, budget in terms of campaign and so on. So it is maybe time to be more smart about, campaigning elections.
Can we directly apply the 5 segments to the top 13 candidates for the 12 Senate seats? Can you help us analyze or make better sense of the top 13? No? So you have Tito Soto first, Willie Ong second, and in the number 10 to 13 you have Leni Robredo, Sara Duterte, former President Duterte. You also have Erwin Tulfo, right? How can we understand this list better using your segments?
Okay, that's a good one, because I think we still have to wait for the next, because we just finished our September deep dive study. So this August report that you're looking at is a ranking report outside of the voter segment study that we ran. In other words, we can't speak of how these 5 different voter segments actually look or view these top ranking candidates. So it's watch this space.
Okay. Okay, but maybe we can get started. I'm just curious how we can apply your segmentation to the current list, or at least the last available one. The solution seekers are looking for this character, right, that they can trust, right? Would that help explain why the Dutertes are there? No, I mean, every now and then, Digong Duterte would say he might run, but or then Sara Duterte once said, even my brothers will run, and so on. So they have that. Their branding is, you need strongman. You need the iron fist with will provide it for you, right? Would that be one way of understanding their particular performance?
Well, there is that expected halo effect, right? I mean, it does actually rub off the Duterte name, si Rodrigo Duterte. That name rubs off. So even what he stood for, what he was to, the people during his time as president, will definitely have an effect, a halo effect on future Duterte brothers or sister voters, right? So yeah, you kind of want to make that association, and I'm sure they will actually capitalize on that because, of course, that's what won their father a seat in the presidency.
What about Tito Soto? In the other surveys as well, he's doing very well. Sometimes he's not the top of the list, but he's always in the top 3 or so, right? Together with Erwin Tulfo, sometimes. Who else? Anyway, what is the best way to understand him? Would it be support from more than one segment, right? Which segments would find him a candidate to their liking?
Yeah. Well, offhand, as I've seen the study of Pinas survey, Tito Soto would work very well with the connection seekers.
Okay.
Because they're very relatable because of 50 years of a known
he's
time
a known quantity, right?
Which is similar to how probably Robin Padilla came into the picture last election because of the connection that people feel with him as an actor and also the type of roles he plays. And then in terms of the solution seekers, aside from the Dutertes, the Tulfos seem to be an image that solution seekers would look for when it comes to justice in particular. Willie Ong will also be, I think, part of the solution seekers because of the health advocacy that he has. So initially, there are very initial indications that the segments are at play. And then, of course, we'll probably see, I'm excited to see the September study. That will tell us, which segments are really matched with the particular candidate. So hopefully we can hear from Roland again.
To go back to Tito Soto, okay, I get the connection cravers, right? But that's only 15% of the electorate. So even if all of them vote for him, he might not win. Where else do you think does his appeal lie?
Yeah, well, we can look at the misunderstood segment because of the competence. Because as you mentioned, he's been in the Senate for the longest time. He's proven to be a very competent legislator in the past. So that may also. So I think there are segments at play here that explain the rankings already. And
would you advise a candidate to put together his or her campaign strategy based on a combination of appeals to different segments?
Yes.
Would it be foolhardy to say, no, just focus on the biggest segment, misunderstood mainstream? 33%. That's I think that's more than enough to win a Senate seat. That's I think 18 million seats more or less.
I think
about 15.
I think it's about trying to appeal to as many voter segments as possible. Because to be honest, you could stand for more than 2 voter segments anyway. You could appeal to 2 or more voter segments. It's just that I think the danger lies in trying to try and appeal to all, right? So the saying goes, one size does not fit all. It's actually present here. It's true here at least because we don't think somebody who like Bong Revilla, his appeal and how he won his election campaign will probably not apply to a Chel Jokno, right? I mean that just disconnects, right, with his voter base. So I imagine it also has to sit within the realm of what you stand for, right? What people actually know you for. So it's not like you try and appeal to voter segments by trying to be more entertaining. Maybe that's not going to work. right? So it's about understanding to what people actually relate or associate youth with. You know?
I'm glad you raised the name of, you mentioned Chel Joc, no? Because he's not running for the Senate anymore.
Yeah.
Right? He's the first nominee of Akbayan Party List. I wanted to ask, does this apply also to organizations?
Yes. Yeah, so this applies to all candidates at different levels. So from national level, down to local level. So mayors and so on. Actually, so yeah, it does apply at any level, local, regional, and national levels.
One of the most interesting findings from the latest round of PNAS survey for me was the findings about political alliances. First of all, why did you choose that particular issue? Why did you raise that particular question? And what do the findings say?
That time I think something was happening in terms of alliances, and then it just became more relevant, I suppose, when si Sara Duterte visited Leni Robredo in Bicol, in Naga. So it was good timing, but we wanted to we asked that question because, of course, I think that was the it was clear at that point that Uniteam was has broken down almost permanently, if not permanently, and so we wanted to ask voters who were loyal to the Uniteam. For example, are they still for that Uniteam, or are they, have they conceded that Uniteam is actually no longer what it was before?
I found it very interesting because one of the findings was those who support Leni Robredo are least open to allying with other political formations.
That makes sense.
Those who are aligned with Makabayan, the Makabayan coalition, are the most open. Something like 48% of them were willing to align themselves with other political formations, and I thought that was an interesting thing. Roland first, and then and Jay. How will these findings about political alliances help me as a candidate, for instance, put together a better campaign strategy?
I suppose alliances work alliances are important because, especially if you belong to a very small segment like Makabayan Bloc and Leni Robredo, whilst very strong, very loyal, and so on. They are aware that they don't make up enough voters to win a presidency, right? As evident in 2022. So I think that conversation is more important. The smaller you are in elections and so on, in party affiliations and so on. So the smaller you are, the higher the tendency to ally with somebody bigger than you.
I agree with Roland. So there's the aspect of resources. So alliances tend to allow you to have access to more resources, increasing your chances of winning. The second part is really, again, addressing the needs of the voters in terms of if you're aligned with a particular group who have these values, they tend to imbibe. The voters tend to see you in the same light, and hence more support for you if you're aligned with the correct groups. So if you're a nationalist, then Makabayan Alliance would do you well. If you're in terms of the New Philippines movement, if you're aligned with admin, then definitely that will help you. Alliances also help in terms of regional power bases. So we focus on the top vote-rich areas in the Philippines. If you're aligned with one of those vote-rich groups, then that also increases your success rate.
We're running long, so maybe just one or two final questions. Jay, earlier you mentioned that 2025 might be a TikTok year. Can you talk about the evolution of the media landscape? How is that affecting politics in the Philippines?
Yeah, well, that came from my experience in the 2016 elections in particular, where we saw that as the millennials became a voter segment in the Philippines, their media habits, which by then was most of time Facebook, affected the way elections were. You saw how the candidates groups and cliques and tribes, as they were called then, affected the perception and the image of candidates more than the other platforms. And then after the pandemic, we saw how TikTok grew in terms of popularity in the Philippines among the Gen Zs. And we have Gen Zs voting for the first time and for the second time this midterm election. So they don't watch as much TV, they don't listen to radio and the other traditional platforms. So if I were a candidate wanting to get the attention and support of these new voter segments, definitely social media, TikTok in particular, needs to be part of my communication strategy.
But you're not saying no more TV ads.
No, definitely. The TV landscape is still quite robust in the Philippines. We still have more than 90 million viewers or owners of TV. But again, the segmentation is a factor here. So those who watch TV are really more of the Gen X boomers, some millennials. So they're still voters and they're sizable as well. So you cannot choose between TikTok and TV. But if you have the resources, both platforms.
But if you don't have,
then definitely
produce a video and show it on TikTok.
Yes. The mileage will be stronger there, and then you can do other types of marketing communication activities.
And finally, Roland, I know that you have a talk coming up where you will speak on the role of the youth in the coming elections. Can you give us a brief overview? Is there, we always say this every time there's an election coming up, the youth will help decide, and so on and so forth, based on the psychographic segmentation and so on. What have you found about youth voters that may spell a difference in 2025?
Well, three things. First is that, their access to information is, next to none. I don't think anyone can match their appetite, their access to, information or data. Second is their, ability to actually decide to vote. I think a lot of people take for granted that just because you're registered, they're voters. But the reality is you still have passive onlookers, as we said, who take a back seat and kind of wait for things to, unfold. The third is, I think you also have to understand that, these people, the young generation, they are still very, pure in terms of their intention to vote, right? People like us who have voted for 3, 4, 5 times, more or less, we have a frame of mind. We know. We are most convinced, we are most decided getting into an election, who we want, who we don't want. Whereas the young voters, especially if they're voting for the first time, they look at it with a fresh pair of eyes and therefore have that same level of approach. And therefore you would like to think that they tend to give, the candidates a fair shake in terms of evaluating what they stand for and who's going to be the best candidate for them. Especially for them.
So access to information, commitment to vote, and purity of idealism or intention.
Yeah.
All right. Wow, that's a lot to go on. Thank you, Roland Ramirez of Insightspedia and Jay Bautista of Kantar Media. This has been a most instructive conversation. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
And that's it for us today. The next step for engaged citizens, as always, is to take a more active part in our democracy. Download the Rappler Communities app to join the chat room of your choice. Thank you. This is John Nery. See you in the public square.